A very good morning to everyone. My name is Shubhang Bhattacharya, and I'm the marketing and brand manager at Silla. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you for this exciting Brand Pulse 360 webinar, an AI-based hybrid solution for a full picture of your brand health. To guide us through the nuances of this, it is my pleasure to introduce our host, Faisal Khan, who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of AI and market research. I invite Faisal to begin today's session, but just before we begin, I would like to highlight that if you have any questions, please use the chat option to put those questions forward. And at the end of the session, I will be asking those questions to Faisal and he will be responding. So let's begin the session. Over to you, Faisal. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhang. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the next 60 minutes. There's some exciting stuff out there on brand health tracking, half a century old product or market research to kind of track your status of your brand equity and what people think about your brand. But yeah, we've got a slightly different way to approach it. So yeah, there's a lot of sweat and blood we've put into this, and hence looking forward to the discussion. I'll just move ahead. Cool. So just before starting off on what brand health is and how we approach brand health tracking, I want to just kind of upfront establish the importance of a successful brand. It's often people say, that building brands are extremely difficult, and of course it is kind of, and that's understandable. But where I look at things from a brand perspective, that while building is difficult, I think the more difficult task at hand is sustaining relevance of a brand and keep refining it over a period of time. So while you have brands like Nike or Apple who do an amazing job at it, but you also have brands like Atari, Hummer, Nokia, Blackberries of the world that somewhere fail to continue to kind of be relevant to the audience and somewhere losing sight of what they were working towards. And hence it becomes important to constantly keep track of the remarkability, or so to say, the brand health status of what people are actually thinking about your brand. There's no definition of brand health per se. Everyone has a perspective on what brand health is. To simply put it, I often give the analogy of comparing it with the vital signs that we get routinely monitored from doctors. That could include your temperature, pulse rate, respiratory rate, blood pressures, just to ensure at a frequent basis that my everything's in check, everything's going well, my health is on track, and if there's anything that's not, then I need to kind of act accordingly. And brands are not very different from that perspective. It's really about just kind of having certain metrics, or so to say, the vital signs, to keep a check on the health of your brand. That is what people think about your brand, whether it's on track, whether how you kind of envision it. Is it going as you would like it to be? Are you communicating, and are you being perceived the way you would like to be perceived or not? And that's where tracking comes into place. Tracking is nothing but it is measuring those performance indicator. Why do brands exist, or what's the end aim of brands? It's really about constantly working on those brands, investing in those brands to be able to drive better ROI, to win market share, and sustain. Like I started off this presentation and the session by saying, it's really about sustaining and building that relevance and continually being relevant to your audiences, and that requires for you to kind of track what's the status of your brand. So it's essentially the measurement of brand building efforts. So whether those are your whether it's your communication efforts, your tactical efforts, your in-promotion efforts, your pricing initiatives, everything else, in terms of all the efforts you're putting, you need to kind of measure it in terms of all the investments I'm backing my brand with, all the initiatives I'm backing my brand with. How well is that, or whether that's succeeding or not succeeding in delivering what I'm out there to deliver. And that's where tracking comes into place. Tracking is no new, it's a very old form of research. It's we often say in the quarters of the world, in our MBA days, wherever there is marketing budgets or research budgets that are being assigned, the first research budget that you need to assign is in a brand health tracker, is in assessing the performance of your brand and constantly tracking that, and everything else can follow. But this is almost the most important pillar of any organization to be able to kind of do their research on and to be able to track their brand health. But there are still organizations, one, that do not track their brand health. And to me, like I said, that is extremely essential. If you don't want to become another Atari, another BlackBerry, another Hummer, it becomes extremely important to constantly be on top of what people think about your brand and to be able to make refinements, whether that's the way you're communicating, whether that's the way you're innovating, that's the way you're extending, you're planning your brand extension, or whatsoever. In terms of any initiatives that you're taking, it's extremely important for all those decisions to be rooted in what your consumers think about you. Having said that, there is also a lot of organizations, brands where have a brand health tracker in place where they're tracking the performance of their brand, how well their brand is doing across different performance indicators. But the question I often ask is it the full picture? So, like I was saying, right, that it's brand health tracking is not new. Everyone's extremely familiar. Every marketing person is extremely familiar with it. Every market research person is extremely familiar with it. It's half a century old form of research that's being done, and pretty much in the similar way since then, in terms of measuring certain metrics to kind of track the performance of your brand. But the question to ask is, are you really seeing the full picture? And how I challenge it is maybe not. That's my perspective, because a lot of brand health tracking that happens is very, very dependent on how the product solution was created, in terms of doing a traditional approach of a survey based or claimed responses on the metrics. So I literally go to people and ask them, do you know about my brand? Have you heard about my brand? Have you tried my brand? What's your experience with my brand? Would you recommend my brand? Or whatsoever those questions might be, which are very, very important, taking nothing away from that. And that is still the core of any brand health tracking. But the context has changed today. The environment has changed today. We are in a very digital dependent environment where a significant proportion of marketing budgets have moved to digital. May that be, your digital campaigns, or a lot of budgets that were assigned for brand ambassadors have moved to social media influencers, your new trade channels or your e-commerce platforms, your word of mouth or online reviews, whether that may be Google reviews, Amazon reviews, Vigo, or whichever third-party platform that is relevant to your industry, or even Google Share, where I'm going on, instead of kind of asking people where I can find or what their opinion is, I'd go on a Google and just search for that brand. And this is today's environment. And if we aren't considering these aspects in your brand health check, then you're literally seeing half the picture. And that's the premise of the way we designed and work towards building a solution that gives a full view, because we strongly believe, and not believe, it's a matter of fact, that today, while it is extremely important to ask people of what they think of the brand, it is also very critical to go and see what people are talking about your brand in the online space. What is the proportion of people what is the interest levels it's able to develop for me to go on Google and search for the brand? What am I saying? When I buy the product, try the product, what am I going on Amazon, and what kind of reviews am I putting, or Google reviews? How many stars am I giving it? How much am I engaging with the content that the brand is generating that shows, is it relevant? Am I familiar with the influencers, and how much am I engaging, and how much am I interacting with the influencers that are posting about your brand? So that entire space becomes as important to capture. And if that's not being captured as a metric, as a metric in the entire scope of brand health tracking, then you're only seeing half the picture. And that's where Scylla solution comes into picture. So that was just in terms of the premise of why Brand Pulse 360 exists, and why it's important for it to look at brand health in a different way in today's environment. So essentially, Brand Pulse 360 is an AI-based hybrid solution, and the intent is just to kind of give you a full picture. So yes, we still believe, and when I say hybrid approach, that kind of vouches for our belief in still doing the survey, in still going out there and asking people the right questions in terms of who's heard of our brand, what do they know about their brand, have they tried the brand. But it is also important to integrate that with the digital insights. So that brings us to our model in terms of how we view, or what Brand Pulse 360 is all about. It takes into consideration the classic brand metrics, which is survey based, a very traditional way of doing and approaching a brand health tracker, which measures awareness. That's basically salience towards the brand. Do people know you as a brand? Do people know your brand? Do people consider and use your brand? Do people love your brand? Do they advocate for your brand? Do they stand up for it? And those collectively form what we call as the classic brand equity score, which a lot of organizations are currently tracking, which some of the amazing organizations and market research agencies are doing, and they kind of have their expertise on it. But what's, like I said, how we kind of look at it, adding an entire layer to it, which is the digital brand metrics. Again, aspects like salience, but salience here is more in the online world. So it's really, what is the presence the brand has in context to the competitive set? How many people is it able to reach through all the collective efforts you're doing in the online space? Again, in context of competition. Reputation, which is in terms of what are the associations with the brand, what are they talking about your brand, what's the good stuff they're saying, what are the complaints they're raising, what are the emotions associated with your brand, are they happy associations, are there certain fear associations? So what are the associations with the brand in itself? And very interestingly, the interest in the brand, which is essentially that comes from Google or share of search, where are you able to generate enough interest for people to go online and search for your brand in context of the category, in context of in terms of the competitive context that you're exploring or looking at your brand at. And together, collectively, that gives you an independent score of a digital brand equity score. Where the beauty is, so while you're able to, in this model or the way we approach it, while you're able to still see your brand classic, the classical score that we're very used to seeing, but also separately seeing your digital brand equity score, and where you're able to consolidate the scores and have a number that you're tracking that gives you a full view. And the entire idea is to give you a full view. And because if you're doing only the upper half, it gives you half view. If you're giving the under half, it gives you another perspective. But it's where you start seeing things together in terms of brand health. So what are the advantages? Of course, the entire premise is based on, it gives you a full view. You're ensuring that you're not missing out on anything in terms of what people are saying about your brand. But what are the standout features when it comes to Sila's product solution around brand health tracking? So the first one, of course, and something which I truly believe is one of the USPs, is the consolidated AI-driven index, which I briefly just spoke about a couple of slides back, which is really essentially saying that you've got your classical modules, you've got digital modules, but more importantly, it's the integration. It's the seamless integration between the findings from a classical approach to a digital approach, and looking at the brand equity using Sila's AI technology to be able to track that. So it's taken into consideration what people claim, as well as the impact it's making in the digital space, and collectively giving you an index that you're able to track. So while you can still see the independent metrics of classical brand metrics, as well as your online and digital equity, but I think it's the AI-driven consolidated index, and there's of course a scientific approach we've got towards arriving at that number that gives you a full tracker in terms of a month-on-month view of how it's headed and which direction it's headed. And these are all benchmarked to market norms. The other beauty about this is the correlation, because a lot of things are happening in isolation. So there's this TV stuff that's happening in isolation, there's social media that's happening in isolation, there's influencer work that's happening, there's paid media that's happening out there, there is a lot of in-store promotions that's happening in place. But are they really talking to each other? So what happens in this case when you're tracking and when you bring everything under the same methodology or same approach, you're able to create correlations and do correlatory analysis between what's happening in the real world versus the digital world, and understand what is the level of impact of each of these worlds on each other. I mean, this is one example which I often give, which I think was very interesting, because we were doing some work in the aviation space where we were looking at the share of search, and we realized that how the World Cup during that time how the World Cup in Qatar had a direct impact on the digital space, where it generated a lot of interest in the brand, to know more about the brand, and of course a lot of travel plans and etc. So there was a general interest in the brand. That was for the first time you saw it coming close to the interest levels in Qatar Airways, coming close to an Emirates Airlines, which is one of the global leading brands out there. So you're able to, this is one example, but you might have an impact of an amazing TV communication on the interest or the volume it generates in the online space, on the online space, where people get started talking about it. And then again, you bring the two worlds together and say that this is the correlation between both of them. The other thing is where we worked very hard, in the back end, is the dashboarding, is the output itself. I do talk about strategic reporting, and I'm sure you're getting reports on a monthly basis for people in organizations who are doing any work in the brand health space. But this is more about talking about a well synergized interactive dashboard, where again, because you've got data that's available on whatever you're capturing, and that's dashboarded. But how we do the surveys and the traditional methodology is, of course, we're working with panel providers, where we're able to kind of run the survey like a typical survey, build a questionnaire, run the survey, get your responses. But how the responses come are, they're well integrated with Scylla's dashboard. You don't get Excel files, you don't get anything else, but they directly reflect on our dashboard, and you're able to kind of have a complete view and the way you'd like to see the data in terms of all the metrics, with customizable filters to review all the data you want to see, and the correlatory analysis between, again, both the methodologies that we are kind of integrating and the way you want to see it. It's also automated and self-serving. So the way it's entirely structured is more productized, where a lot of it is almost do-it-yourself. And with AI capabilities, I'll talk about generative AI and how that's integrated into the solution, and how that helps you kind of make literally even analysis and interpretation very in your hands and democratized in terms of how you're doing research. But so to say, the idea is really to give full access, where you have the data in your hand, where let's say if it's a monthly tracker, where you are able to, on a fixed date, the dashboards are updated, the access to the data is updated, again, from both sources. So whether that is in terms of and if you want to like see your survey results, or whether you want to see your digital metrics, or the well synergized integrated view where you're seeing the full picture of your brand health, that's all extremely well integrated, and that's automatic. You have access to it, your team members have access to it, your internal stakeholders have access to it, and that's how it's kind of built. This is in space very exciting, where every one of you it's become a household discussion, thanks to OpenAI, ChatGPT, Bard, etc. People have been using it for various reasons and various use cases, in terms of right from writing questionnaires to discussion guides to interpretation of data. So it's got multiple use cases. How we've done it, Lara is our in-house Scylla's LLM-based ChatGPT style kind of conversations, which we've kind of created. It's basically conversational AI, which is built in the dashboard. We're able to ask, able to ask questions and get interpretations and perspectives from Lara. So we've got a Ask Lara on the dashboard, where you're able to ask questions. So questions could range from anything, any particular any particular thing, data point that stands out versus, let's say, last month's result, or what has been the overview of the last 6 months, whatever questions you might have. Or is there any specific reason that is driving a drop or an increase in a score? So you're literally having a conversation where it's pulling out data and giving you interpretations and its analysis from the data set within the research itself. Absolutely secure, because it's a private space. It's not taking data or collecting or giving interpretations from anything that's outside the data set, but it's operating within that data set. So every metric that we've captured through both methodologies that's available there, you can have that interaction and get your answers there. And hence, to the last point I was talking about, that it's almost everything's very automated. So while you get strategic reports, you get our perspective, we build in that, but it's almost do it yourself in many scenarios. And yes, of course, we still love reports. We're researchers. We love to read reports. We love to give our perspective. So while it's very productized, while you have access to the dashboards, seeing data in real time, how is it approaching, how is it changing, depending on the frequency of the tracker itself. But of course, well supported by strategic reports where we add in our differences month on month, any perspectives in terms of how things are changing, any hypothesis, patterns, trends, whatsoever. But it's the typical reports you would get, but it's really giving you a strategic perspective in terms of what's really working, not working, what are the observation, and how you can kind of take things forward. One of the things, talking about advantages, one of the things we take extreme pride in, which is our Arabic native AI. So our entire technology is what we call as Arabic native. Essentially, it understands and analyzes data at a dialect level, which has a direct correlation and impact on the accuracies of the data. So I get this question often in terms of, but the data is, we're not sure, accuracy levels are good, bad, stuff like that. So there's always been a lack of visibility, unsurety of all, especially the digital part of the data that comes in. But with Scylla, that's not a worry, because in this region, a lot of content that's generated in the online space is in Arabic, and at dialect level. So you'll see a lot of Jordanian, Saudi, Emirati, Egyptian, and your interpretation essentially changes based on the dialect itself. So what Scylla does, it first picks up the Arabic, it picks up the dialect, and interprets the data and what they're actually speaking about the brand in that context of that dialect and in that context of the sentence, to be able to give you the right perspective, whether it's a positive, it's a negative, and what they're really talking about, what's the theme and the broad messaging of any comment, any post, any review that's being left behind for the brand. So if you see all that in terms of how we're approaching it, there is for sure more value that Scylla brings in, because you're getting a full perspective. There's no two places you need to go to. It's just there, right? It's a larger scope, not only because of the two modules we're covering, because you get a whole digital space which runs an analysis on big data. So it is very, very powerful from that perspective, and at affordable pricing, because we have advantages with AI and with technology and with a lot of self-serving approaches that we've gotten built in our process. It kind of it really is much more affordable than you're probably used to paying. So that was broadly in terms of the model itself, how we go about in terms of what are the advantages and what's the strengths of the model. Getting into a bit of the more diagnostics part in terms of what is the information we're actually capturing, and what do we get into. So of course we're looking into, and we've divided this into two parts, because you'd want to know what is it within the classic brand metrics that we're capturing. I did briefly mention them in the model itself, but also what is it that we're capturing in the digital space. It's really bringing back the simplicity and actionability. One thing which I've observed as a researcher in 2 decades in research is, I think brand health in many ways has become unnecessarily complex. It started off by measuring awareness, consideration, usage, and then to arrive at the actual metric, there are layers of analysis that are done. There are layers of aspects and factors that have been brought into consideration, which somewhere I'm not 100% convinced actually do justice to what actually brand health means. Because to me, still brand health is the vital signs, the blood pressure, the respiratory rate of the brand itself. So it's really the basic, and that's where we wanted to bring that simplicity back, that actionability back, and measure your key data dimensions in terms of salience, which are your various forms of awareness, do people know my brand? At what level do they know my brand? How many people know my brand? The second level is about the consideration and usage itself. It's really about, well, am I in the, so you know about my brand, am I in the consideration set? Am I being considered to be bought? Am I being used? Am I the most often used brand? So do I feature on the top of the list? So it kind of moves on to the next level of brand health. And the next is, of course, affinity and advocacy, which is really, you can call it brand love, you can call it loyalty. There are different terminologies that you can use, but it's essentially saying that, do I like it enough? Do I love it enough for me to recommend it to other people and to pay a premium for it? If I have a willingness to pay a premium for the brand, for my brand versus other brands in the same category, that reflects loyalty. And collectively, we have our own metrics and scientific approach, where we kind of, based on this, calculate our brand equity score or the brand health score, which measures in a silo. You'll be able to kind of, based on these factors, get that one number in terms of what your brand score is and how it's performing. Like other interviews, how we approach this is just getting into the bit of the approach part and the methodology aspects. But online interviews, we're working with trusted panels in the region, across the Arab world and beyond. But these are self-administrated questions where you've got access to pretty much a very decent representative profile of sectors, categories across, and user profiles and consumer profiles across. We don't expect, and we don't believe very strongly, very particular about not having interview lengths, because again, I'm from the research world. We've seen interview lengths and brand health interview lengths going up to 40, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 35 minutes, which compromises a lot of things. And again, going back to the same point, it's really about the way we want to include the classical approach is bringing back the simplicity and the actionability, focusing on the core questions, the key metrics, and keeping the interview length way much below 15 minutes and at max at a 15 minutes. And like I said, I was talking about a while back, where all this data gets captured, gets integrated with our dashboarding system, Scylla's dashboarding system, and all the data is there the way we'd like to see it, with the filters that we want to see it there. So that's the classical approach, where we are kind of doing that. In parallel, we are also tracking the AI-driven, the digital brand metrics, and that's where the full view comes from, because you're building this. Is here also salience is another parameter. So you've got a salience there in terms of asking awareness. There's a surrogate or a different way of looking at salience in the digital world, which is about your online presence, which there are multiple metrics within online presence. And there are again calculations and workings that we do in terms of understanding what is your presence and impact in the online space itself. So that's from volume, engagement, how many people are you able to reach, in the context of competition when you look at it. So what's your share of voice, share of reach, in terms of how much you're able to reach versus how many in the context of, let's say, other brands in the same, operating in the same category. What's your proportion playing out there? Reputation becomes an important aspect here, because social platforms are often known for what people say about it. Like I was saying, that your review platforms have become the new word of mouth. So whether that's sentiment analysis, that's the gross positive and negative sentiments, emotions associated with your brand, which gives a deeper meaning and understand what your consumers feel about your brand. And of course, association. So what are the top topics? Are they talking about your product features, your characteristics, some image-driven factors? But what are the core associations? If you look at all the conversation that's happening about your brand in the online space, what are the top themes that are getting mostly captured? Share of search is there's an entire session I can do on share of search, an entire webinar that can be dedicated to it. It's very under-leveraged, but it's very powerful. Many organizations have started using share of search as a lead indicator to market share, where you are able to directly correlate your interest in a brand to market share. We've done this when we've done analysis to build in correlations, and we know there is a direct correlation between your share of search versus your actual market share that you would get from your retail data or other sources of share data. It essentially kind of tells you how much people are into, how many people are, what's the proportion of people interested in my brand. So let's say if I'm doing a study for electric vehicles, I will be able to come back and use a metric saying that the proportion of people going off on in the category of electric vehicles, there's a 50% share of Tesla, a 20% of Volkswagen, a 30% of Nissan, or whatever we define the category as. And that, if you see, correlates to the market share, and that becomes an important indicator, because that is a lead indicator in telling me how much interest am I able to generate for people to go online and search for my brand in the space of the competition. And all this again kind of adds up to arrive at what we call as the digital brand equity. These are taken into account right from all the factors. Again, there's a science behind it, there's an algorithm behind it that helps us lead to a single index that we can track month on month. Of course, there's additional informations across both classical and digital approach that's on consumer profiles like demographics, personality insights. We've got a model built in about understanding the personality insights, because you want to go beyond the demographic to understand who your consumer really is. What is it that drives them? What are their needs, their value systems? We also are able to do dialect analysis, which is a surrogate of nationality analysis, by whether that's Egyptian, whether that's Jordanian, whether that's Saudi. So you might be performing, there could be a certain negative sentiment that you might suddenly see amongst, let's say, the locals, that could be driven by some specific initiative or communication, or the other way around. So you're able to kind of get into those diagnostics also. But these are not inputs to the equity score itself, but they're additional informations that are possible to capture along with everything else. How we go about, I think I pretty much mentioned it through the discussion in terms of how you would go about getting the data for your digital space, but it's everything online, pretty much everything. So it's all content generated by the brand itself, whether that's X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, so on and so forth. Organic posts, conversations, which are consumer generated. So there's brand generated content, there's consumer generated content, which is conversations, comments, reviews. Your review platforms will have your stars, 1 star, 2 star, 5 stars. The news and PR available on Google. Reviews on third-party platforms like Amazon, Vigo, depending on your category, which one is relevant. So kind of that all gets into account when you're looking at what I talked about in terms of salience, in terms of reputation, in terms of associations. So all these sources of information are tapped into to be able to get that. And of course, there's AI at the back of everything that's used to perform these sophisticated data analysis models that are just, because a lot of this data, I'm talking about millions of data points amongst hundreds and thousands of people, that gets into account while collecting the data, analyzing the data, and especially arriving at the brand health scores and brand health performance indicators. So coming back to where I started the presentation or the solution, talking about Brand Pulse 360, at an overall, this is your main chart that summarizes everything, where we're saying that you're getting a full view. So you have we've got a way to kind of work with the classical metrics, which is integrated with the digital brand metrics. And what you're able to get is one index, which you're able to track over a period of time to get the full view and consolidated view. So I'll just kind of talk about just my closing thought, and then we'll be open for questions. It's really about embracing evolution. Research in itself is a very, very old stream of work. Like I often say, it's a 100-year-old industry. Brand health is one of the oldest form of those research in terms of tracking. It is the most important form of research, one of the oldest, one of the most important forms of research. But I think somewhere we need to embrace evolution. We need to acknowledge that our macro context, our environment has changed in which the brand operates. Till a certain point in time, the way brand health tracking was done was absolutely correct, was the correct way of doing it. But in this context, Scylla, our belief is that if you're that the way it's being done is important, but it unfortunately gives only half the view, because your context has changed, because the digital space has become extremely important and has a role to play in every building block of your brand, from awareness to loyalty. Every step between building awareness to loyalty and that cycle I started by talking about, the digital space plays an extremely important role. And hence, integrating AI-driven insights with traditional methods paints a complete picture that empowers us to navigate the complexities of modern branding. So I think it's really about, my closing thought is really about embracing this evolution, acknowledging that there is a change and hence a need to look at brand health in a different way. But that's pretty much it. We'll be happy to take questions. And of course, after the webinar, if there's more interest to know more or specific questions or demos, that we can kind of engage. Over to you, Shubhang.
Thank you so much, Faisal, for taking us through all the aspects of brand health. I invite our guests to put in their questions. If you have any, please use the chat option to put in your questions. But we have received questions prior to the session from one is from Ushma Kapadia. She asks, is brand equity calculated on the basis of owned or earned socials?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Is brand equity calculated on the basis of owned or earned socials?
Got it. So yeah. So when we're looking at the digital, this question would be relevant to the part of the digital metrics where you've got organic media, which is basically everything that brands are producing at an organic level, community is posting, everything. So that for sure is taken into consideration. When it comes to earned media and paid media, that is very much taken into consideration. But specifically, there are certain caveats and certain limitations when it comes to earned media, where there is a bit of dependence on getting some data from the organization we're working for in itself, because a lot of dark advertising happens that you're not able to access to. Minus that, it is taken into consideration.
Understood. Another question is, do you have norms available for benchmarking the scores?
Yes. So we are able to, yeah, we have, I mean, again, with AI, your benchmarking becomes much more easier. So we've got market norms. So let's say if there's a steady in Saudi or UAE or a GCC level, you have norms in terms of what is a good performance or a good score or not so good score based on that. So that's geographic norms. You'll also have category norms where you'll be able to do that. Specifically for the digital, it's extremely powerful, the norms, because we are currently at this point of time tracking, I mean, if I just say like 3,000 plus brands, where we have scores available for them across categories, across markets, across age bands. So you're able to kind of, the norms are much more stronger there, but yeah, we have consolidated norms as well.
Okay, and another question, is this a DIY product?
Yes and no. So there is human intervention, of course. There is interaction. It is important to understand the brief, the need. But the way we are working towards this is really passing on the power to our clients, to brand custodians, where we're trying to automate everything. If they're able, because everything's integrated, so they have access to, once the process is established, they literally have an access to a dashboard where you have all metrics available, where you can review the data using filters, whether you want to see data by age, by market, by, if you're working on different categories, by category, different brand performance comparisons. So that's all possible. And like I said, all the classical and everything's well integrated and synergized. So it's not that it's all at one place. So you're able to do that. And there's Lara, which we're a huge fan of, where you pretty much ask all questions and it can give responses to. But yeah, of course, we are accessible. We're researchers. We bring in a perspective. So yeah, it's a yes and no. But the idea is to really, as far as possible, give the power and democratize the data and give the power to the clients, to as much as, to whatever extent that's possible.
Perfect. I see that we are at the end of our questions. If anybody has any further info, would like any other information regarding this topic, you can visit our website. There's an entire page dedicated to this particular topic, and you can even apply to request for a demo over there. I thank you very much, Faisal, for
Thank you very
conducting this
much.
session and taking us through all the aspects. And until next time, thank you everyone for joining in. And we will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.